Hey guys, welcome back. I am going to be going over chapter 9, which has to do with the urban environment. And we'll just look at really urban wildlife, a little bit about how urbanization has affected the environment, and the city as an ecosystem. Okay. So, when we look at urbanization and population, that has really been what has pushed the growth of the city, right? We wouldn't have cities if there wasn't a demand for it and a need for homes and houses. So, it's really been these three urban revolutions that have transformed human society. So, your first urban revolution, people were moving into the cities for the first time. This urban revolution coincided with the advent of agriculture. So it really, first, you kind of have like this demand, right? And it kind of a shift in skill and labor. Before it used to be all rural jobs and skills, right? And then slowly the advent of agriculture and mass agriculture, then that started to kind of shift the paradigm a little bit. Then you had your second urban revolution from the 1700s to the 1900s. This coincided with the Industrial Revolution. So now we start to see really this huge uptick in mass production of agriculture, right? Not quite so much as we will see in the third urban revolution. But from the 1700s to the 1900s, you really had these modern cities start to develop and gain prominence as commerce replaced farming. And then the third urban revolution that's underway today, it really is quite different from the prior revolutions in that it is the greatest population growth that is taking place. It's happening today, and we see that growth in cities worldwide, especially in Asia and in the global south. So, just a little number for you. In 2008, half of the world's population lives in urban areas. So that's kind of an old data, right? That's an old statistic. So now, 10, 12 years later, the amount of people who live in urban areas is far greater than the amount of people who live in rural areas. So urban versus rural, right? So those are maybe two terms you don't know what they mean. Urban versus rural. Rural, RURAL, is going to be very little buildings, little amount of buildings, commerce, shopping centers, right? It's going to be like out in the mountains or in these rural areas. I think I have a slide with those definitions on there. So let's look at the term urbanization. Urbanization is the process in which people are moving from these rural areas to densely populated cities, right? So they're leaving these jobs they once had, maybe on the farm, or maybe mining, or fishing, or the timber industry. All these different jobs which were in rural areas are now having this shift towards more populated areas. And it could be for many reasons. There's kind of a lack of demand for those jobs now. And so you have to move to these cities because that's really the only job or, a source of income there is. Today, about 19% of the US population lives in rural areas, so that's not very much. Most people in rural areas have occupations that involve managing natural resources. So it could be, again, like I said, it could be mining, it could be farming, but we have seen kind of this shift in agriculture and farming to where like the family farm, the farm that will just support you and your family or a few people, it pales in comparison to those large-scaled corporations, right? And the way that we are now mass producing chicken, pork, fish, beef, all those different animal proteins has really not let these small farmers continue. So there's been a shift in that as well. An important distinction between rural and urban areas is not really how populated they are or how many people live there, but how many people make a living there. So, I mean, it could be very densely populated or sparsely or not very populated, right? But it really depends on how many people are making a living there. So that's going to that's going to be a big distinction between rural and urban areas. Most people in rural areas have occupations that involve managing natural resources. In urban areas, people have jobs that are not connected with natural resources, right? You don't really know a lot of people that are in the timber industry or mining or fishing or things like that, right? Cities have grown at the expense of rural populations for several factors. You have an increased mechanization of farms, right? Fewer farmers support an increased number of people, and fewer people have direct access to farmland. So it's not, when you buy your chicken at the store, it has that pasture on the package, and you feel like you're buying it from a farm. That's not what farms today look like. Maybe in the 50s, maybe in the 60s. Yes, they look like that. But there has been a shift in the way we produce food. And this is very related to our food resources chapter that we're going to go over pretty soon. And you will have an activity that will also talk about factory farming and the way our food is produced and our animal protein. It's not on this very nostalgic farm, with one farmer and the wife inside making biscuits and things like that, right? That's not what our farms look like today. Poor people often move to cities because of land tenure issues. Few wealthy people own most of the land. The cities have traditionally provided more types of jobs because cities are the sites of industry, infrastructure, and development. They're growing, so there's always going to be a job to find. And also educational and cultural opportunities and technological advancement. So those are some of the reasons that we can just, lay out and say this is why people have moved from rural areas to the cities. But now about 80% of the population lives in urban areas. 19% of the U.S. population is in a rural area. Characteristics of the urban population. So every city is going to be unique in its size, climate, culture, its economic development, all those different things, and its history, right? Every city is different. You have some cities that are new, like Placentia, California, or Santa Fe Springs, or Cerritos, right? And then you have some cities that are a little bit older, have a different type of history. So like, that's my dog sneezing. Choo-choo, you okay? Choo-choo. Are you okay? You guys heard my dog mom voice right now. That's kind of embarrassing. So you have cities that have a little bit more history or were settled a very long time ago versus a city that was just developed very quickly like Brea, right? And I think Brea, Cerritos, and maybe Placentia does have its history. Maybe that's not fair for me to say that, but you guys can kind of have that idea. You get the idea, right? There's differences in every city. And a lot of it is because of its history and its settlers. So cities are going to have a greater mix of things, right? Of race, ethnicity, religion, and socioeconomic statuses in these urban areas. And also urban areas tend to have younger people or younger population. Urban areas are generally younger due to the influx of many young adults from rural areas, right? And so you'll have that urban area surrounded by these residential zones, which is still urbanized, but it's not as urbanized as the central downtown. And in those central downtown areas, that's where you have a younger population. Why? Because there's more jobs. They don't have to travel very far for that downtown area to work there, and they're not needing to have like this home, this family home, right? So as that population ages, they might move out and find like a semi-residential area or suburban area. Urbanization trends. So you have something called megacity, because urbanization is a worldwide phenomenon. It's not here just in the United States, but it follows these different like there's different reasons and outside influences in the way that these cities grow, right? Like here in the United States, the way we grow our cities is much different than a place like Singapore or China or East Asia, any country in East Asia or Australia. Everything is so different, but you do see all over the world that urbanization is a trend. It's all over the world. It's not just United States or first world countries. Okay, this is a worldwide global phenomenon. So remember, urbanization is a movement of people from rural to urban areas, as well as the transformation of rural areas into urban. So we have this term, megacities. These are cities with more than 10 million inhabitants. So you have places like China, Tokyo, Japan, Mumbai, Mexico City is a megacity, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And another term, an urban agglomeration. This is an urbanized core region that consists of several adjacent cities or megacities and their surrounding developed suburbs. So it's kind of like a mixture of this megacity, and then you have like this suburb or adjacent cities that are still kind of connected to that megacity, but they have formed kind of their own. For example, the Tokyo, Yokohama, Osaka, Kobe agglomeration in Japan is home to 60 million people. An urban agglomeration, okay, I just gave you that definition. So let's look a little bit at some of the world's largest cities right now. So this chart is a little bit outdated. It is from the book, but for 2011, you had Tokyo, Japan, at the #1 spot for world's largest cities, and then third spot you had Mexico City with 20.4 million people. I don't know if you guys have ever visited Mexico City. It's absolutely amazing, but it is mind-blowing to think that that amount of people that live there. So your projected amount, you can see that for 2025. I can't believe that's in 5 years. That is crazy. Okay, let's look at Mexico City, this mega city. I did get a chance to visit in 2018, December. No, it was July 2018. My dad is from Mexico City. He came here as a young boy, I think at 13, and he had not gone back in over 40 years. So he is 67 now, and he took his first trip back to Mexico City 2 years ago, and I was able to go, my sister, my mom, my husband, and he hadn't seen his siblings in over 40 years. I cannot imagine what that's like, but it was pretty awesome. So some of the pictures you'll see are from my trip and from a couple years ago. Just look at this picture, right? This picture is from a National Geographic article they did on the size, of Mexico City. It just keeps going and going and going. Mexico City, also known as Ciudad Mexico, right now there's about 21.2 million people. I'll have some links with this on your module. And, something to think about also, it's a mega city, and just about 40 miles southeast of the city is an active volcano, El Popocatépetl, which is crazy, right? They live right 40 miles north of this very active volcano that smokes and erupts pretty often. So before I get into a little bit about the city and the history of the city, I wanted to talk about the history of Latin America, because when you start to look at these cities, not like here in the United States, you don't really have this old history, right? We're pretty much a new country. So when it comes to these other countries that have these huge mega cities, there's layer upon layer of history that has caused it to grow in the way it's grown, change in the way it's grown, right? Or change how it has changed. So who are the Latin Americans or Mesoamericans? They're a mix of indigenous people. There's a triple heritage, which refers to its main sources of people and culture, indigenous, African, and Iberian. The Maya, Aztecs, and Incas built these complex, sophisticated civilizations, and within 150 years of contact with the Europeans, the indigenous population in this region declined by 90%. So I wanted to show you when you go to Mexico or any part of Latin America, who these civilizations are, because when you get there, you see all these historical buildings, and a lot of the real history was taken away during colonization. So a lot of the real history was knocked down, and then you have churches built instead, which is kind of crazy to me. So you have the Aztec, Maya, and Inca. So if you've been to Cancun or places like that, that's going to be more Maya influence. And then Mexico City is going to be more of an Aztec influence. So when we did go visit, we went to a lot of different amazing places. And one of the first places that we did go to was El Templo Mayor or Tenochtitlan. This is what it looks like today, right? And actually, this is what it looked like before. So when the Spanish came in, they tore down a lot of their pyramids here and temples, and they used all those stones that they tore down, that they demolished this beautiful building to build their churches. So actually we went into this area here, and there's a spot where they have just discovered underneath the church there is still ruins of the old pyramids. So they're starting to find kind of like what they built on top of. So that first foundation, they're starting to find it. And this picture here, you can't see too well, but it is pretty new in Mexico City, where they did find remnants of the old city of Tenochtitlan, which is really exciting because the reason the Aztecs settled there was they were looking for this sign, and they said when they see an eagle on a cactus in the middle of a lake, then they were like, that's the sign, this is where we're going to build our city. And they built their city on a lake, which is a pretty amazing, right? So when the Spanish got here, they could not believe that it was actually working, and they ended up covering the lake, and now there's a lot of issues, foundational and structural issues in Mexico City, because a lot of it is volcanic soil, and Mexico City is actually sinking. So there's a lot of structural issues with that. Colonization, right? What are you going to do? And we also went to Teotihuacan. We saw the Pyramid of the Sun. So this is one of the largest, how would I say it? The largest ruins, I guess. Bigger than Chichen Itza. And this one you are actually able to climb. So these are all my pictures. Really, really fun. Pretty amazing. To go visit that, and that is also a few miles south of Mexico City, but it is a place that you do want to go visit. And then a little bit of a fun stop that we did was Xochimilco, and I did say that it was built on a lake, and you can still kind of see that here. What they did was they had these types of farms where it was on a lake, but you were able to have your bed there and grow your fruits or vegetables, or really agriculture along the lake. So some of that remnants is still there. A chinampa is a type of Mesoamerican agriculture which is used which used small rectangular areas of fertile arable land to grow crops in the shallow lake beds in the Valley of Mexico. Now, this is like the party spot. I don't know if you guys have ever been there. It's pretty awesome. You rent these little boats, these little chinampas, and they can put your name on there and stuff. You rent it for like an hour. It's super cheap. And they just take you out and you float around and you can take as much alcohol on there as you want. So I know when we got there, I was like, what is this? And my dad's like, oh, we'll be right back. And then he went around the corner with his brother and they came back with like this huge bottle of tequila and like 2 squirt bottles. And I mean, that wasn't enough tequila because we went around and around. And then these people, these guys right here, they're selling you elotes, or they pull up to the side of your boat and they sell you like a michelada, whatever. I mean, anything you want, you can get there. I think that was one of the best experiences. It was really cool. And then here's my dad. Look how happy he is. And then this is my mom, and then this is my aunt and my other aunt. So they hadn't seen each other in 40 plus years. I can't imagine what that's like. And they sell grasshoppers. My dad said he grew up eating grasshoppers. So when in Rome, I did try it. I got a 20-cent bag of chapulines. They're like lemony and salty. I didn't finish the bag. I just tasted it. And I did also eat a snail. And I'm like the pickiest eater. So my parents were like, what the hell are you doing? Like they could not, I mean, I don't even eat beef. I don't eat shrimp. Like I'm picky. So, but I think, you know, when you're on vacation, it's always fun just to go out of the box. And we were supposed to go again this year. But again, 2020, right? Everybody's plans have been ruined. But the nice thing is that my dad is actually able to go back. There's a lot of people that can't go back to where their families are at. So that's something to think about also. All right, enough of that. Here's El Popo. A little bit of that backstory is here. Okay, so let's look at the city as an ecosystem, right? Because cities are these complex systems and they all do not develop the same. And you can actually get a degree in urban geography and be really like this urban sociologist and just study the way cities grow. Urban sociology, how cities function, studying urban areas as urban ecosystems helps us to better understand how ecosystem services connect the urban population and environment. So let's see, what is this? Urban ecologists study urban trends and patterns in the context of 4 variables: poet, population, organization, environment, and technology. These 4 variables do not function independently of one another. So population would be the number of people. Different factors that can affect this would be the age of the population, right? Composition of the city by age, sex, ethnicity. The organization of a city is the social structure, including its economic policies, the type of government, and social hierarchy. The environment would consider both the natural environment and the city's infrastructure and how those are implemented and if they work well together, or if that was thought about when the city was first being built, right? Because now these cities, these new cities, you can really think about the environment versus in the past, it was just where, you know, the settlers settled. But now I feel like our cities, they have more thought into it, and we'll look at that a little bit later this today. Technology, human inventions that directly affect the urban environment, like aqueducts, air conditioning, infrastructure again. Environmental problems associated with urban areas. So this is an environmental class. So before we get to environmental issues, sometimes I just have to kind of give you guys the background. And in this case, it was a little bit of urban. In this chapter, it's going to be a little bit of urban geography. Environmental problems associated with urban areas. There's so many, right? If we were in a classroom, I would ask, hey, what are issues or what are some environmental problems that urban areas will pose? And, you know, we would have a great in-depth conversation about that. The idea of the city as an ecosystem is not complete without considering effects of the city on the environment. So right away, you're probably thinking pollution, right? Yes. Or the way that the city grows. Growing urban areas affect and destroy the surrounding environment. Are we thinking of the surrounding environment when we are building these new cities or these new developments or tracts of land, right? Are we thinking about how we are building the city? Are we building it sustainably? Are we conscious about the environment around it? So an important term is habitat fragmentation. This is a process by which habitat loss results in the division of large continuous habitats into small, greater patches. So what it really means is that the habitat is chopped up because we're not looking at the actual habitat. So for instance, in this picture here, it's a great example of habitat fragmentation. You have these, there are probably lots of agricultural fields, right? All nice, straight. And then you have like these chunks of, or sparse areas of natural habitat. So you're kind of like chopping up the habitat, you're fragmenting the habitat. This would be habitat fragmentation, and it's dangerous for any type of wildlife or fauna that lives within that habitat now has to travel further or risk their lives. Maybe this is a freeway or a highway or a thoroughway, and it has to cross that area to get to the next habitat in search of resources, food, mating, right? So this is going to pose threats to the wildlife that live there. For that reason, something has been developed, which are wildlife corridors. They look like just bridges so they can look pretty. They are actually for wildlife to take them across. So these corridors are important to wildlife because they help in migration and looking for food. So instead of crossing that highway, they're able to take these little bridges. Ecoducts is another word for them, these wildlife corridors. And they do use them. People say, like, do they really get on there or use it and cross using it? And yes, they do. They really do. So they just follow it and go over, and they have more access to whatever it is that they're looking for, and they're not ran over. Brownfields. Brownfields is also an effect of the urban environment. This is an urban area of abandoned vacant factories, warehouses, residential sites whose redevelopment is hindered due to possible contamination. Brownfields are available for reuse, but it's a complicated process. So they're just empty lots of land, or not empty, or develop lots of land that cannot be reused because they're contaminated. So when you have a brownfield in a lower income community, that starts to raise questions, because would that be happening in affluent communities? So we start to see that there is something called environmental racism, and you start to really find that when you look at the city, right? Some cities have more access to resources. Some cities have less access to resources, and it's a huge list of reasons why, and a lot of different layers to that. But it is a real it is environmental racism. So if you guys are interested in the environment and equality and justice, I would tell you to pursue maybe a career in environmental, what's the word? Environmental justice. And yeah, environmental justice, that's the word. Sorry, I lost for words right now. So that is a place that you guys can go into. And so you're kind of like combining two different things. Food deserts. So again, a lot of urban areas lack grocery stores and access to fresh foods. So maybe you live in a food desert and you don't even know it. A food desert is defined as any place, if you need to travel more than 1 mile for an actual market to get your food, then you live in a food desert. So if your closest thing is a liquor store or a gas station, or a convenience store, it's a food desert. So these residents are in risk of higher rates of nutrition-related diseases. And again, the people who live in these food deserts are going to be people of color, marginalized communities, people of lower socioeconomic status. So it is kind of this systemic problem, right? These food deserts. And, it's 2020 in the United States. I think everyone should have quick and easy access to fresh foods, because what type of foods are you going to be able to get at the liquor store, the grocery store, or I'm sorry, the liquor store, the convenience store? Not fresh foods, right? And so here you might have to travel maybe 2-3 miles, but there are places in the United States, maybe not California, or maybe even California, where you're traveling 5-10 miles to your local grocery store, and that's really going to pose a problem for the health of those residents. So I will have a link. That link there is going to be in your module, and you'll have a discussion on this for your module activities this week. And another important term are urban heat islands. So urban heat islands, when we look at the city, we're also looking at these urban issues that we just talked about, right? And I'm kind of just going over them really quickly. But an urban heat island is a phenomenon. The closer you are to the downtown, the higher the temperatures are going to be, because as you move away from that central business district or that central downtown area, you'll have more green areas, you'll have more parks, you'll have more trees, more grass. So that's going to keep temperatures lower. However, in the downtown areas, there is more buildings, huge air conditioners, which are giving off a lot of heat. Not a lot of green at all, just concrete, which absorbs more heat, right? We learned about that albedo effect. The darker the surface, the more absorption. Vegetation reflects a lot of heat. So temperatures will be significantly higher the closer you are to the downtown area, and as you move away, temperatures do drop substantially. So that is something that urban geographers did discover, these urban heat islands. Urban heat islands affect local air currents. So they produce a low pressure cell that draws in cooler air from the surrounding area. Then you have this dust dome that kind of stays there in this urban downtown area, and that can contain a lot of pollution. Environmental benefits of urbanization. Can urbanization have environmental benefits? That's really a huge question, right? So if we were to say that, we're going to plan this city and think about the environment, that could be a solution. So that would be like a well-planned city, right? Sorry. I apologize for that, guys. I had to cut that short. And then I tried to fix the mic and it said I had to stop it there. Anyways, so let's keep going. So we're going to look at how cities can be planned and if it's possible for these well-planned cities to be sustainable or have the environment in mind, right? So before we get to that, I want to talk about the decentralized metropolis. So this is really getting more into urban geography. And so when we look at the way settlements are organized on land or the way cities develop, it's really changed in the past because it has a lot to do with our culture and our society and where our society is moving. Urban decentralization refers to metropolitan areas that sprawl in all directions, and suburbs start to take on the characteristics of traditional downtowns. So if we think about why downtowns have developed, the reason we have a downtown is because before, that's where all the jobs were at, right? And so the downtown area was where people who worked within the city would live, right? And then you had on the exterior of the downtown area, you have like your suburbs, your residentials, right? Now, as this downtown begins to grow, those suburbs begin to take on the characteristics of the downtown. So people who can and will, who can afford to, now will move out of those suburbs and move more outwards because that downtown area is growing. Why? Because the downtown is viewed negatively, right? And so people with resources who can move out of this undesirable area will move out and build new or live in new suburban homes, residential homes, neighborhoods, right? And so over time, that starts to change, and then they can move further out. We call this sprawl. Instead of building for the future and thinking of the future and the environment, we tend as a city in the United States to sprawl outward because we have the space. We really do. It's a new country, right? It's not like we have all these historical buildings like Europe, Mexico City, Italy, right? And do you know what I'm saying? So we tend to sprawl outward, which is actually very, very dangerous. So that would be urban decentralization. You're kind of changing the downtown area, okay? It starts to become larger. Metropolitan areas sprawl in all directions, and suburbs take on the characteristics of these traditional downtown areas. Both Canada and US cities have experienced decentralization, but the impact we see more here in the United States. Inner city problems are like poor transportation, widespread auto ownership. Why is that a problem? Because there's a lot of greenhouse gases, right? If everybody owns a car, then there's going to be more emissions, right? Widespread auto ownership because we're all driving to our job. There's not a really good transportation system. We see that here in Los Angeles. It's a huge problem. Fewer regional scale planning initiatives have encouraged middle-class residents to keep moving beyond the city. People see the downtown as bad. They want to move out. This is called sprawl. This is the move beyond the central city. In the early 20th century, urban land use was generally organized in rings focused around the central business district, which is the slide. So it used to be like the central business district was where the jobs were at, right? The CBD is what we call it in urban geography. In the early 20th century, urban land uses were generally organized in rings around a highly focused central business district. The modern pattern has shifted. Today, suburbs have a mix of retail and industrial areas, office complexes, entertainment facilities. So it's kind of changed over time. And the larger node of activity is in this edge city, which has fewer functional connections with the central city. So an edge city develops outside of the central business district, but doesn't have everything that the central, like a city should have, right? There's fewer functional connections with the central city. So an edge city would be like Costa Mesa. You have this office and retailing district. It would be a great example of an edge city. So let's look at some consequences of sprawl as those who can move out of the downtown area do move out. You have this kind of like these issues within the inner cities, right? So you have people who are left within these inner cities and these negative downtown areas, high crime, lots of drug use, gang activity, whatever you want to say, right? Now, after time, you have these more affluent people come in and want to now kind of repurpose that downtown area. Now, you know what? Let's make this the arts district. Let's make this old building a brewery. Let's make this, apartment building a Starbucks, right? So we call this gentrification. And now those residents who were left in this negative downtown area, now these people want to come in and repurpose their homes, and they are, left without the ability to pay that rent because the rent is very, very high. So gentrification is the displacement of lower income residents of central city neighborhoods by higher income residents. So that's a consequence of sprawl, of just moving outward and not building in a way or growing in a way that thinks about these future problems. Further development extended edges of the suburbs. You have loss of wetlands, loss of biological habitats, air pollution, right? If you're sprawling so much further away from your central business district, you're driving even further to go to your job in the downtown area. And now you're releasing even more greenhouse gases, right? The further you drive, the more emissions there is. So there's a lot of issues with sprawl. Yes, this is the American dream, technically, right? This is the American dream, is to have this home with a large lawn and a picket fence and a two-car garage, right? It technically is. My parents came here as immigrants, and my dad came here as an illegal immigrant. He's now a citizen. My mom came here as an immigrant, and their goal was to have a family here, and I think that they risked a lot to get here, and I think I am their American dream. So whatever I do, I hope I make them proud. But they've always said, "Oh, Miha, you have to own a home. You have to own a home. You can't rent." That's really difficult. Like, my husband and I are going to be 40 soon. Not me. I still have a long time before 40. But, I just am now able to start paying off my student loans. And so maybe by the time I'm 40, maybe we can buy a home. I don't know if I want a 30-year mortgage at 40 years old. Do you know what I mean? So we're told that we have to own things. And again, going back to that video that we watched in the beginning of the semester, that our only value here as citizens in the United States is our ownership, what we own. So maybe we have to have an entire paradigm shift, and be okay. Well, you know what? I might rent my entire life. There's no shame in that. There is no shame in that. Because can we all afford to have this American dream? So really, what is the American dream? I don't think it's owning a home. I don't think that is. So I'm kind of going all over the place here, but this hits on a lot of different things, and it's a very layered issue, right? So suburban sprawl would be the patchwork of vacant and developed tracts around cities, edges of cities, and they contain a low population density. And a lot of these places don't have access to a grocery store, right? So these developments are not built with an urban or with an urban geographer mindset. They're just kind of built to house people. So there are some solutions, something called smart growth. This is an urban planning and transportation strategy that is purposely thinking about sprawl and how not to do that. So this would be urban planning. It incorporates compact development, creates walkable communities. They're not developing these individual tracts of land. The point is to avoid sprawl. It's bicycle friendly. But again, this is not like everybody can own this home in these very, very planned communities. Celebration, Florida is an example of a smart growth city. Well, that's it for today. So I want you guys to think about my little talk there about your American dream. What is your American dream? And so it's going to be interesting to read that, you guys. I kind of went off on a tangent a little bit, but if we were in the classroom, I think we would have had a nice discussion there. So finish your modules this week, and I'm just kind of overthinking things right now. How am I going to fuse these two lectures together? Oh well, it's okay. I got it done. I hope you guys are doing well out there, and I hope you take some good time to reflect on this journal entry here. It's one of my favorites during the semester. Okay, bye you guys. Take care.